afternoon. Welcome to the zoo and welcome to today's programs on the future of wildlife conservation efforts at the zoo. Today we'll be featuring Tony Vecchio, who is the zoo director, Mike Keele, who is the deputy director, and Chris Pfefferkorn, who is the zoological curator. He has a lot of hard words: Pfefferkorn, zoological, and a little bit later, Malalililand. I'll get it. In any case, they will discuss the conservation efforts the zoo participates in both regionally and internationally and the impact that they have on the future of the world. But first, a few announcements. This is going to require some serious writing on your daytimers or your scratching on your Palm Pilots, because normally we have no programs in August, but we have some really good opportunities that we just couldn't turn down, and the staff has been kind enough to say that they will work on these during the time of the year that's supposed to give them a little breather. We do have no program next Friday, August 6th. There's no program. But there will be a special forum on August 13th with U.S. Surgeon General Richard Carmona. And he's sponsored by Nike, and he's going to be speaking on undoing the obesity epidemic. It will be held at the Governor Hotel. We will not be having dessert, mashed potatoes, or rolls. So you can make your reservations for that now, if you'd like to, online. Then there will be no forum on August 20th, but another special forum on August 27th. And we will have former Senator Slade Gorton of Washington, and he, of course, was one of the members of the 9/11 Commission, and you may have heard on the news today that the 9/11 Commission people are spreading out around the country to present the findings. We're still looking for a Democratic member of the panel as well, but since it was a nonpartisan result, that perhaps is not necessary and it may not happen. This appearance by Slade Gorton will be sponsored by Preston Gates and Ellis, LLP. Then we will have no forum on September 3rd, but the forums resume their regular schedule on September 10th. And that will be the September 10th presenter, I believe, is Vicki Phillips, who's the new superintendent of schools in Portland. We've been waiting a long time. Now, other upcoming special events include our Citizens Read book group. We have not given up reading for the summer, and the August book is called Paradise Wild: Reimagining American Nature. David Oates, who's the author of the book and a Portland resident, will lead the discussion, and the topic of the book addresses how we interact with nature and the environment, and it will be held as usual at the Zimmerman Community Center. The book is available for purchase from the club or on the club's website, and when you purchase books this way, the club gets a slight stipend for each book sold. Now, we have another event that is rather unusual to announce it this early, but it gives you some advance notice so you can think about buying hiking boots or something. There's going to be a Clear Creek Canyon hike and picnic on Saturday, October 2nd. And it's presented by the New Leaders Council, and Metro Council President David Bragdon, Metro Councilor Brian Newman, and Metro Naturalist James Davies will be leading the group. And it will be a hike into the Clear Creek Canyon, which is about 10 minutes from Clackamas Town Center. Who knew? It's a rare opportunity to see some of the 8,000 undeveloped acres of open space which is protected by Metro. So that should be really interesting. So you start baby steps. You can start walking a block now, and by the time you get to October, you'll be in shape to do the hike. All of these events, incidentally, are explained in more detail in your bulletin and on the website. Broadcasts of City Club are in part underwritten this quarter by Pacificare, Portland General Electric, and Zimmer Gunsel Frasca, and of course we're very grateful for their support. Last week when I announced our sponsors, they got a rousing applause, which I thought was very nice. Now, if any of you have any electronic devices that might ring or beep, I'd appreciate it if you would turn them off now so that we can get started with our program. I'd like to introduce Tony Vecchio, who's the director at the Oregon Zoo, and he has been here since February of 1988. He began his zoo career in 1969 at the Highland Park Zoo in Pittsburgh in concessions. Now that's what it says. I'm anxious to hear more about that. I can just see him swirling cotton candy or something, I don't know. But maybe that's what he did, because he worked his way up to a position in the children's zoo. And then after earning his bachelor's degree in environmental resources management and wildlife conservation from Penn State in 1977, he was employed by Riverbank Zoo as a carnivore and primate keeper. And during this time, he attended the University of South Carolina and completed a master's degree in biology with a thesis on primate social behavior. Mr. Jane Goodwin. Mike Keele serves as the zoo's deputy director, and he's responsible for animal care, animal health, and horticulture programs at the zoo. And he oversees the activities of conservation, research, and education. Mike began his zoo career as an animal keeper at the Portland Zoo 32 years ago. That's what it says. Is that right, Mike?
That's correct.
Wow. You must have been 4 or 5 when you started. 6. He's active on national and international committees that address elephant management and conservation issues. And Chris Pfefferkorn is currently a zoologist curator at the zoo. He received a Bachelor of Science degree from Eureka College, and he's responsible for the management of the animal collection and the animal care staff for the carnivore, Africa, elephant, and marine life areas of the Oregon Zoo. And he's been working in the zoo field for 15 years. He's currently involved with the Matabeleland leopard and cheetah project. He's studying the ecology and conservation of leopards and cheetahs in Zimbabwe. He also serves as the executive director of the nonprofit Zimbabwe Conservation and Research Unit. So I'm looking forward to hearing from all of them. Welcome.
Thank you very much, and welcome to the zoo. It's really nice to have you folks here at our place. This is a nice treat for us, so thank you. And yes, I am an expert at a couple things in life. One is baboon rear ends, which I studied for 5.5 years when I was in graduate school. But one of the others is making cotton candy. And it just breaks my heart now when you go places to buy cotton candy and you see it kind of tacked up in the plastic bags. Because in the old days, we had the little machine that had the bin, and the cotton candy would come flying out, and it was quite an art to take a little paper stick and put it in there and wind it around and create a beautiful work of art / snack. And I'm very good at it, so I don't get to brag about my cotton candy skills very often. Thanks for bringing that up. What we hope to do today was talk a little bit about conservation in the zoo and zoos in general, the zoo community. And the way we're going to divide up the work today is I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about history of conservation in zoos, and then turn it over to Chris, who's going to talk about some of the international efforts we're involved in, and then Mr. Keele will talk about some of the local, regional efforts we're involved in, and then it comes back to me again to talk about the future of conservation. And we only have about 40 minutes to do that, so I'm going to jump right into it. You heard I started in the zoo business in 1969. It's nice to have that long-time perspective to see firsthand some of the changes that have happened in the zoo industry. The zoos were talking about conservation when I started in the late 1960s. Not everybody in the zoo business was talking about it, but conservation was being discussed. There were a few people that were thinking about it. You have to remember, 1969 was a few years before the Endangered Species Act, a few years before the Marine Mammal Protection Act. So amazing, I think, that there were zoo people looking into the future and recognizing that zoos needed to change and become more conservation oriented. So having said that, I'll say we floundered in the 70s, trying to find a conservation identity. And one of the fascinating articles I remember from those days, the early 70s, is folks who considered themselves zoo conservationists were predicting what the future of zoos was going to look like. How were we going to be conservation organizations? How would that shape the zoos of the future? And the theory, the proposal that came out and got national media attention was that recognizing that zoos can't save species essentially two at a time. If every zoo only has, two of each animal, there's no way you can have a significant enough genetic pool to save species. So the prediction was, the model that was created was that zoos in the future would look much different. Each zoo would have to specialize in just a couple of animals, couple species, but that you would have 100 individuals of that species. So the Oregon Zoo would probably have been the elephant zoo and maybe one other species. And this idea was promoted, actually for a year or two. This idea floated around, and as I said, I think one of the big monthly magazines did a big feature story on it, a lot of media attention. But they came up with this plan without consulting the marketing and public relations people at all. Because the reality is, who's going to go to the zoo over and over again to see, one or two species, even if there are lots of them? So that idea never caught on. In the 70s, as we recognized that idea wasn't going to work, we just kind of floundered around thinking, how are we going to save these species by just by breeding endangered species kind of two at a time? Well, a great revolution in the zoo business happened in 1980, almost 25 years ago. One, the Zoo Association, American Zoo and Aquarium Association Board of Directors declared that to be an accredited zoo, conservation had to be your number one priority. That is the mission of every accredited zoo in North America, to have conservation as their number one priority. That was a great day. And the other thing that came out were plans, how we were going to accomplish the kind of the technical difficulties, the genetics of keeping endangered species alive. And the solution was, yes, even though zoos can only have, 2 or 4, or maybe 10 at the most of a particular species, if we look at the entire captive population as one population and manage these animals cooperatively, all the zoos work together to consider the species one population and exchange animals back and forth, essentially freely on loan rather than buying and selling like they used to in the old days, that we could manage these species and keep them genetically healthy for years and years to come. And that's what happened back in 1980. We created these plans to breed endangered species, and they've been very, very successful. And we've done a great job. In fact, as you walk around our zoo today and you look at the endangered species, what you'll see, probably 80% of the endangered species you look at our zoo are on some kind of birth control, because we've done such a good job breeding them that we can't just keep cranking out babies if there's no place to send them. And that lesson that we learned in the early 80s became very critical as we defined our role. We realized it's not enough just to keep endangered species alive if there's no wild to send them back to someday. And at that point, zoos got much more involved in what we call field conservation, working on conservation programs outside of our own gates. And I will tell you, the passionate conservationists among us immediately ran out to save the rainforest and started working on really rare and exotic species in faraway places, and have done some fantastic work on saving exotic endangered animals. But we recognized, I think a few years after that we weren't really connecting with our visitors because they can't identify with things like saving babirusa on the island of Sulawesi. How many of you know what a babirusa is? I see no hands are going up right now. How many of you know where Sulawesi is? One or two? I'll be honest with you, I've been working to help save the babirusa for years, and I have trouble finding Sulawesi on the map. And by the way, the babirusa is a pig. It's one of the most interesting and handsome pigs in the world, but it's a pig. And most of our visitors don't know that and don't know where it's from and don't really get excited about hearing about our efforts to save babirusa. So when we recognize that we need to get folks more involved, I think we recognize we have a need to make connections for people. We have to get things that are important to our constituents, the people that come visit the zoo, the people that live in the metro region here or the whole state of Oregon. So we got much more involved in local conservation projects at that time. But this isn't an evolution where we try one thing and then give it up and try another thing. I liken it more to a toolbox. where we try something, it works, we continue to do that, but we keep adding more tools. So we went from kind of cooperatively managing endangered species to getting involved in international programs, and now to being involved in regional programs. And those are all things that all three of those things are things we still do. They're all tools in the toolbox. And what I'd like to do now is have Chris come up and describe one of those tools in a little more detail, give you some information about one of our international programs that he's involved in.
Thanks, Tony. Today I'd like to talk to you about a project that has been sponsored mainly by the Oregon Zoo's Future for Wildlife Fund. It's the Matabele Land Leopard and Cheetah Project in Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe has two major tribes, the Shona and Matabele, and I work in Matabele Land, which is in the western part of Zimbabwe. Historically, cheetah used to range over 4 different continents, North America, Asia, Europe, and Africa. And at the end of the 19th century, there was an estimated 100,000 cheetah left in the world. Now, the wild global population is estimated between 9,000 to 12,000 animals, and it is listed as a declining population. The cheetah is also listed as endangered by the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. In Zimbabwe, where I work, they estimate that there is between 500 and 1,000 animals. The reality is they don't know. They've used computer models to try to generate population numbers by using factors such as usable land, known ranges of cheetah, to try to determine several numbers and get a population estimate in Zimbabwe. Cheetah are globally protected by what's called CITES, and this is the Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species of Flora and Fauna. Signatories to CITES agree to restrict the trade on these animals or the parts of the animals. Ivory is probably the best known example of a product that's controlled by CITES. Even though a species is listed on CITES, certain countries can get exemptions for like hunting trophy quotas. Zimbabwe happens to be a country who gets a trophy quota of 50 cheetahs per year. And this is alarming because they don't know how many cheetahs they have. If they do have between 500 and 1,000, then we can safely say that cheetahs will be extinct in Zimbabwe in 10 to 20 years. Over 50% of cheetahs in Zimbabwe, though, do live on private land. Now, the status of the leopard's a little more common. They're not listed as endangered, but they are on the CITES Appendix 1 list, which means that they are protected by the international trade laws and treaties, just like the cheetah. The sub-Saharan population in Africa of leopards is estimated at over 700,000 animals. In Zimbabwe, again, they don't know how many leopards they have. They believe they have a lot of leopards just based on sightings that are reported by safari operators, hunters, and private landowners. Zimbabwe, even though leopards are protected by CITES, is allowed to take 500 leopards a year as hunting trophy quota for export. The threats to cheetah and leopard today is the loss of habitat due to human encroachment in agriculture. This is very evident in Zimbabwe by the National Land Reform Act. The Land Reform Act was put in place in the year 2000 by President Robert Mugabe. The idea behind the Land Reform Act was to provide the black war veterans from the Independence War in 1980 land which they could farm. What they targeted was the white-owned farms of the white Zimbabweans. White Zimbabweans at the time made up less than 2% of the population in Zimbabwe, but owned over 85% of the usable land for farming. This is a very chaotic and very dangerous Land Reform Act that was implemented because basically the way it worked was a landless black could pitch up at a white farmer's gate, tell him he has 24 hours or less to vacate his property and take over the land. Deaths and injury occurred, and another factor that happened with this Land Reform Act is over 300,000 black farm workers are now homeless and jobless. Once a farm was taken over, it was parceled up between all the people that took the farm over, and then they would hunt the prey, the gazelles and antelope, for food, and then they would use dogs, traps, poison, whatever they had to hunt these carnivores like leopard and cheetah. Because another threat is persecution as livestock predators. It's widely believed that cheetah and leopard predate on the goats and cattle of the farmers in Zimbabwe and throughout the world, actually. Our survey, part of our job, was to survey these farmers and ranchers to find out how true that really was, and some of our preliminary results show not very many livestock was lost to leopard and cheetah. Other threats include competition with large predators like lions and hyenas. It's very easy for a lion and hyena to steal a cheetah kill. If a lion or hyena comes across a cheetah cub, they kill it automatically. They want to reduce the competition in the wild. And poaching for skins. Back in the 70s, this used to be a major factor in the loss of spotted cats. Through the work by people throughout the world, that really has reduced. So our project objectives were to carry out a detailed survey of the distribution and status of cheetah and leopard in northwest Zimbabwe. We did this by handing out survey forms to landowners. We had every safari vehicle going into the national parks in western Zimbabwe. They would get a form from the ranger at the gate, and anytime they saw a cheetah or leopard, they would mark down as much information as they could about that. We are going to assist national parks with the capture and removal of injured or problem cheetah and leopard on commercial farms. I worked through a facility there called the Chipangali Wildlife Orphanage. This orphanage has been in existence in over 30 years, and basically what would happen would be either the landowner or the national parks would call us and say, hey, we know there are 5 cheetah on this property, the farm is being taken over, can you come rescue the cheetah? So we'd send a team out and we would trap the cheetah and bring them back to the orphanage, and they would get medical exams by the veterinarians, and then we would feed the cats to get them in the best physical condition as possible. To date, we've rescued 18 cheetah since 2001. Then we would release these so-called problem cheetah, or the cheetah that we rescued, back into the wild in the Wangi or Matopus National Parks in western Zimbabwe. We fit radio collars on all released animals to study their movements and determine if the release is successful. We use a canvas strap collar. It has a transmitter that can transmit a signal up to 4 kilometers and has a 48-month battery in it, so it allows us to study the animals for up to 4 years. We're undertaking a detailed ecological and behavioral study of the leopard in the Matobo National Park and a cheetah and leopard survey in Wangi National Park. The biodiversity study in the Matopus National Park has not happened in over 30 years. It is a national park in Zimbabwe, and they don't even know what kind of species reside within the park. We provide educational opportunities for local people. This slide here shows a group of school children who came out to a cheetah release site when we were releasing cheetah in 2002. We had 3 school buses of kids come out in the week prior to the release, and we let these kids see what a cheetah looks like. Most Africans can kind of tell you what a cheetah is, but most of them haven't even seen one. So we let the school kids come out and we try to talk to them about the behavior, the natural history, and give them some information about cheetahs. What's really interesting is a lot of times we have the rangers, the park rangers, come to our camps to ask us questions about leopards and cheetahs. These are park rangers who are tasked with protecting the animals, and they really don't know a lot about them. So we try to teach them as much as we can. And working through the Chipangali Wildlife Orphanage, we're trying to develop educational materials for use in the local schools. The big goal for this project is to produce a detailed report, and we want to make recommendations to national parks from which leopard and cheetah management plans can be formulated. We hope to tell them a better estimate of how many animals are out there, and then they can formulate management plans, hopefully change their hunting quotas, and make it better for these carnivores in the parks. Our project update, as to date, we have 16 cheetah that we've successfully released since December of 2001, and so far we have not lost a cheetah yet. 5 leopards have been trapped in the Matopus National Parks, collared and re-released, and home ranges have been determined for 5 of these released cheetah and 3 of the released leopards. I'd like to thank the Oregon Zoo's Future for Wildlife Fund, Oklahoma City Zoo, Cameron Park Zoo, Columbus Zoo, Detroit Zoo, John Ball Zoo, and the AZA Cheetah Species Survival Plan. Without this collaborative effort, we could not have done what we've done today. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I just want to note that Chris got 10 minutes to talk about one conservation project, and I have 10 minutes to talk about 5, so hold on. I've been fortunate enough to be with the zoo for over 30 years and have enjoyed being a part of the evolution that has made us the conservation education organization that we are today. Nope, went too far. Today I will describe some of the regional conservation efforts that Oregon Zoo staff, volunteers, and interns are involved with. These are hardworking, committed individuals, and as you'll see, their efforts have made a difference. We have formed many conservation partnerships, and we believe that partnerships are one of the keys to the success of this regional effort. A major accomplishment for Oregon Zoo was being accepted as a partner in the California Condor Recovery effort. This is one of the most high-profile conservation efforts for a single species in the United States, and only 3 other facilities are part of the recovery team, including the Los Angeles Zoo and the San Diego Zoo. But the zoo had to first establish standing as a capable and competent conservation organization in order for the California Condor Recovery Team to consider us becoming a partner. In 1997, we made a decision to expand our conservation efforts and to find opportunities for hands-on conservation that would benefit regional at-risk species. Our first effort was with the Oregon silverspot butterfly and our efforts to help supplement the dangerously small populations found at the Nature Conservancy's Cascades Head Reserve. The Oregon silverspot butterfly inhabits native grassland habitat. The butterflies may owe their early existence to vegetation burning practiced by Native Americans. This burning helped provide suitable habitat for the plants that the butterflies rely on. The blue violet is the sole larval food during the development phases in late winter, spring, and early summer. But the violet is having a difficult time growing in large enough numbers to support the butterflies. This is believed to be the primary cause of the butterfly's decline. The Oregon silverspot butterfly was listed by the United States Fish and Wildlife Service as threatened in 1980. Although historically the butterfly ranged from Washington down the coast to California, currently it is restricted to 4 sites in Oregon and 1 in Southern California. In Northern California. The 4 Oregon sites are monitored annually. The population at one site, Mount Hebo, is currently at its historic mean, but Rock Creek and Cascade Head are 45% and 68% below their respective historic means. The numbers at the 4 site, Bray Point, are too low to establish meaningful trends. Factors that have contributed to the decline of the butterflies are all habitat related and include the loss to coastal grasslands, introduced species where non-native plant species have successfully outcompeted with the native species, change of habitat management, fire suppression has altered the habitat, and traffic mortality. Off-road vehicles destroyed the violets and also the habitat. How is supplementation useful? It can help to maintain genetic diversity, which is critical to the fitness and survivability of any managed population. It can result in minimizing inbreeding, which can reduce the loss of genetic diversity. It can help to develop several healthy populations, which then help to mitigate the loss of a single population through stochastic effects such as severe weather events or disease epidemic. And experience gained through supplementation efforts are important for expanding the silverspot's current range into sites where they have been extirpated. Adult butterflies are usually collected in September and October by the Nature Conservancy staff. They collect butterflies with worn wings in the hope that these older animals will already have left some eggs in the wild so that we are not removing valuable genetic diversity. The females lay the remaining eggs, and about 13 days later, the larvae emerge. They spend the majority of fall and winter in diapause, a period during which growth is suspended. In the wild, they may do this underground. At the zoo, they do this in a refrigerator. Mortality during this phase is highest, and we have lost as many as 80% of the larvae during diapause. We continue to experiment with the captive environmental conditions in our hope of reducing mortality. Those that survive diapause are fed violets that have been raised by the zoo's horticultural staff. The caterpillar you see is Sylvia. Oh, wait, I'm sorry, that's Spike. Concurrent to our hand-rearing efforts, habitat restoration is going on to varying degrees on all 4 sites. Strategies include controlled burns, hand weeding, mowing, seeding, non-native plant species mitigation, and saltwater spray. Unfortunately, successful strategies are highly location-specific, and what works best on one site may not be effective at another due to small differences in topography, soil type, and microclimate and species composition. Ultimately, the pupa are returned to the field in special coastal butterfly communes. They are monitored to confirm that the butterflies emerge. At this point, it's taken about 8,000 eggs to produce 587 pupa for release, and so far 267 butterflies have emerged. We don't have the count for 2004 because we just released them this week. While working with the silverspots, we started a couple of efforts with Oregon spotted frog. Oregon spotted frogs are highly aquatic and live in or near permanent bodies of water, including lakes, ponds, slow streams, and marshes. They prefer areas with thick algae and vegetation for cover, but may also hide under decaying vegetation. They are most often found in non-woody wetland plant communities. Historically, the Oregon spotted frog ranged from British Columbia to northeastern California. Based on surveys of historical sites, the Oregon spotted frog is now absent from at least 76% of its former range. They are state listed as endangered in Washington, and while not listed as threatened or endangered in Oregon, their numbers have declined and they are on the state's sensitive species list. And they qualify for listing under the Endangered Species Act, but thus far have not been officially listed. The threats to the species habitat include livestock grazing, development, introduction of non-native plant species, changes in water levels due to construction of dams and alterations to seasonal flooding patterns, and poor water quality. Additional threat to the species are predation by non-native fish and introduced bullfrogs. Our involvement with this project was not as resource intensive as the Oregon silverspot butterfly project. However, it wasn't without challenges either. It appears that there will likely be a future need to either supplement the current populations of Oregon spotted frog or reintroduce animals to former ranges. Captive propagation can greatly reduce mortality of the tadpoles, resulting in a sizable number of animals available for supplementation or reintroduction. A part of captive propagation is understanding the dietary requirements of the larval frog, and this was not known at the time of this project. We studied 4 different dietary regimens in an effort to identify a naturally produced source of food, as well as 2 diets that could be prepared in our kitchen. Our studies were inconclusive in identifying a suitable captive diet, even though some of the tadpoles were raised to metamorphosis. However, another researcher successfully raised Oregon spotted frog tadpoles to metamorphosis on a diet of algae grown on the surface of plant debris in an outdoor tank. And it might be just that easy, but it would be better if we could find a diet that is easy to prepare and readily available. Through surveys, we can assess the impacts of the current environmental condition on egg mass production and development. For several years, we have been assisting with the survey and monitoring of frog masses at Comboy Lake National Wildlife Refuge in Washington State. The purpose of this work is to monitor for ongoing research on egg-laying patterns and survivorship of egg masses to determine the impacts of water management practices caused by the dams. From butterflies to tadpoles to turtles, western pond turtles are a thoroughly aquatic turtle of ponds, marshes, rivers, and streams. They can be found in woodlands, grasslands, and open forests. They may be seen basking on logs, cattail mats, and mud banks. Only 10 years ago, western pond turtles were on the verge of extinction in Washington State. Seattle's Woodland Park Zoo and Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife have been working to conserve Washington State's western pond turtle population for over 13 years. Raising young turtles in captivity for the first several months of their lives give them an edge or a head start in surviving when they are returned to the wild. Oregon Zoo joined this effort in 1999. The turtles were state listed as endangered in Washington, and again, while not listed as threatened or endangered in Oregon, their numbers have declined and they are on the state's sensitive species list, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service lists them as a species of concern. The initial decline may have been caused by commercial exploitation for food. These turtles were also popular in the pet trade. An unknown disease killed about 36 turtles in 1990. This doesn't seem like a large number, but it represented 1/3 of the western pond turtle population in Washington State at that time. Introduced species like bullfrogs and warm water fish have also had a negative impact on the turtles, and habitat degradation, which altered or eliminated the wetland habitat through development of water diversion projects, impacted the turtle's range. The western pond turtle is declining throughout most of its range and is highly vulnerable to extirpation in Washington. 3 populations remain in the Columbia River Gorge. The total number of western pond turtles in known Washington population is estimated at about 1,000 individuals, and that's up from 150 animals just 10 years ago. Many of these individuals went through the Head Start program at the Oregon Zoo and Woodland Park Zoo. Each year, staff and volunteers help to count, trap, fit transmitters on adult female western pond turtles. They then monitor their movements in order to determine where the females nest. Once the nests are identified, the nests are protected with wire exclosure cages that help to prevent predators from eating the eggs. The turtles hatch in the fall and are about the size of a quarter. At that time, they are collected and housed at the zoo for the next 10 months. During this time, they are fed, unlike wild turtles that are dormant during the same time. This allows them to grow to the size of a wild 3-year-old turtle in only 10 months. At this size, they are less vulnerable to predation by bullfrogs and other non-native species, and they can be released back to their hatch sites. To date, the Oregon Zoo has raised and released almost 200 western pond turtles. Last year, we doubled the amount of holding space so that we could increase the numbers that we could raise. While we continue to participate with butterflies, frogs, and turtles, a new conservation opportunity came our way. The pygmy rabbit is the smallest rabbit in North America. Adults weigh less than a pound and measure less than a foot in length. They are one of only 2 rabbit species in North America that dig their own burrows. Pygmy rabbits are usually found in areas of dense sagebrush cover with relatively deep, loose soil. The Columbia Basin pygmy rabbit is a distinct population of native rabbit that once occupied Douglas, Grant, Lincoln, Adams, and Benton counties in central Washington. In 2002, it was estimated that fewer than 30 individuals remained in Washington and only in Douglas County. They were Washington state listed as threatened in 1991 and later state listed as endangered in 1993. They were petitioned for protection under the Endangered Species Act in 2001, and in that same year, the rabbits were declared ecologically extinct. They were federally listed as endangered in 2003. The rabbits live in sagebrush steppe habitat where they dig extensive burrow systems. They feed on sagebrush by climbing the bushes. In winter, they burrow tunnels in the snow from bush to bush for feeding purposes. The major reason for the decline of the pygmy rabbits is the conversion of sagebrush habitat to agriculture. A secondary factor is the loss of genetic diversity over the last 50 years. In 2000, the Oregon Zoo began working with Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife to develop husbandry techniques to successfully breed pygmy rabbits in captivity for subsequent release. Though pygmy rabbits had been held in captivity in the past, Oregon Zoo became the first facility to successfully breed pygmy rabbits in captivity. That doesn't seem like a great feat considering what we all have heard about how rabbits breed, but pygmy rabbits have proven the exception to that rule. In May of 2001, the Washington State Pygmy Rabbit Recovery Team made a decision to breed these rabbits in captivity for subsequent reintroduction. An effort was made to bring all remaining wild rabbits into captivity for intensive propagation. Oregon Zoo developed husbandry protocols that are currently followed at all partner facilities that are housing and breeding pygmy rabbits. The first trial release was in 2002. 20 pygmy rabbits from the non-endangered Idaho populations were captive bred and reared as a surrogate species for release. Only a male and 2 females survived into the next breeding season, and there was evidence of 1 breeding pair in 2003. Based on the results of this release, the Pygmy Rabbit Recovery Team is considering strategies that will increase the chances for survival for released rabbits in the future. And finally, California condors. While we were working with the butterflies, frogs, turtles, and rabbits, we were also communicating to the California Condor Recovery Team our interest in participating in the California Condor Recovery effort. Our track record with the other conservation projects helped to establish our credibility as an organization that would commit long-term to conservation efforts. We joined the team in 2001, though we didn't receive any condors to work with until November of 2003. California condors require large areas of remote country for foraging, roosting, and nesting. Foraging habitat includes open grassland and oak savanna foothills that support populations of large mammals such as deer and cattle. Condors may fly 150 miles a day in search of food. In 1890, there were approximately 600 birds remaining in the wild. The last one observed in Oregon was in 1904. By 1983, there were only 22 California condors remaining on Earth. Through the recovery effort, they number around 217 today, with 89 birds in the wild. During the Pleistocene era, ending 10,000 years ago, the condor's range extended across much of North America. By 1940, the range had been reduced to the coastal mountains of Southern California, with nesting occurring primarily in the rugged chaparral-covered mountains and foraging in the foothills and grasslands of the San Joaquin Valley. Today, condors are being reintroduced into the mountains of Southern California, north of the Los Angeles Basin, in the Big Sur vicinity of the Central California coast, and near the Grand Canyon in Arizona. Several factors have led to the decline of the condor population. Condors become exposed to lead by ingesting lead bullets or lead shot fragments from shot carcasses that the birds feed on. They've also been intentionally destroyed by hunters and ranchers. Many birds perish on power lines, but condors are especially vulnerable due to the large 10-foot wingspan, and egg collecting has contributed to their decline. The California condor recovery goals include establishing at least 3 separate condor populations of 150 birds with a minimum of 15 breeding pairs each, and each of the population needs to experience a positive population growth rate. Currently, there are 3 release sites in the U.S., which I mentioned earlier. Maybe one day there will be a 4th release site. We would suggest the Oregon coast could provide suitable release sites, and wouldn't that be wonderful to see those birds there one day? Currently, Oregon Zoo holds 6 breeding pairs of condors at our conservation center, located away from the zoo. We obtained the birds in November of 2003. Each pair has their own indoor and outdoor quarters, and their every move is closely monitored and recorded. We thought there was a good chance that the birds would miss a breeding season as they acclimated to their new facilities. However, we were elated when one of the pairs laid 2 eggs. One of the eggs was artificially incubated, and then it was hatched out and reared under foster parents. The other egg was transferred to the Los Angeles facility where it hatched. Both chicks are thriving and will be candidates for later release. Though we were pleased with our success with these 6 pairs in the first phase of the condor facility, fundraising continues so that eventually our holding capacity will double and we could have up to 32 breeding adults. All of these projects would not have been possible without partnerships with other conservation organizations, and all of our partners have staff and volunteers who are equally committed to conserving wildlife and realize how effective we can be when we work together. Unfortunately, there isn't enough time today for me to portray the complexity of these conservation initiatives, nor the committed, determined efforts of our staff, volunteers, and interns. We have gained considerable experience and knowledge through our regional conservation projects, and now have a far better understanding of what field conservation entails. Our experience and knowledge help us share our conservation messages with visitors and the public in ways that we hope will inspire them to create a better future for wildlife. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Take a rest. You look exhausted after that marathon there. You know, the secret, I'll give away the secret here. The secret to good conservation work is not good programs. It's good people. And the Oregon Zoo is blessed with having a fantastic staff, a very passionate, dedicated, conservation-minded people. And I'm glad you got to meet 2 of the very best today. So thank you, guys. That was a good job. I want to talk a little bit about the future of conservation programs in zoos. I'm going to cut my 10 minutes down, though, to a minute so we can have some time for questions. So on the short term, talking about the future, we're going to continue to do these things that you heard about today. We'd like to do more, and we'd like to continue to improve these programs. That's pretty short term. I'll be a little bolder than Mike. We are bringing condors back to Oregon. The California Condor Recovery Team hasn't approved that yet, but they will. We are going to work hard on that and bring that bird that Lewis and Clark described back, the bird that the Native Americans revered. It will be back in Oregon one day. We are going to team up with some of our partners that you heard about today, and the condor will return to Oregon. Hopefully, soon enough that I can add it to my life list, as I'm an avid birder. Let me tell you a little longer term views of conservation in zoos that is my opinion. I guess I don't speak for the American Zoo and Aquarium Association today. This is my opinion. But what you heard about today was good programs that we have at the zoo. If you went to the Audubon Society or the Nature Conservancy or Globio, or even the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, you would hear about good programs. The concern I have about programs is they are very discrete in that they're limited to a species or a habitat or an area. And I think the next step in conservation is we need to think bigger. We do not have a conservation plan in this country, and we need to think about conservation more than a bunch of good projects. We need to have a vision for conservation in this country. We need to have a plan so that these projects that we will work on, that we will continue to work on, are supporting a bigger picture for conservation. We are hoping right now to work with some of the other government agencies, state and federal agencies, as well as other zoos and aquariums in the Northwest, as well as organizations like the Audubon Society and Nature Conservancy, to develop a regional conservation plan for the Northwest that all of these programs will then fit into and support. So it's a pretty bold vision, but I think it's a critical next step to start thinking about conservation on a landscape scale rather than a species by species or even habitat by habitat vision. The other thing that I think is going to happen, very much related to that, we still tend to think of conservation as projects. It's a project, and what that usually means, it's a project over there. So it's the old not in my backyard mentality, in that, yeah, I'm a conservationist, I support this project somewhere else. And what we really need to develop is a culture change. People need to think about conservation in a different way. It has to be part of our culture, our fabric of being. Conservation has to be something that we are all aware of and we all do on a daily basis. Not some project that's out there, in another state or another country, but it's the way we live our lives. And getting people to think differently about conservation really is going to take a change in behavior. And change is hard. We all know change is hard. Change in behavior is very, very hard. And it's going to take a lot of work by a lot of very dedicated people to get the general public to think differently about what conservation is and what it means. But those are the things we're going to be working on in the future. So thank you again for being here today and listening to what's happening at your zoo. And I guess now we open it up to questions.
We have a microphone here for questions, and our board host today is Mike Burton, who will ask the first question. Mike has been a public servant for over 25 years, including 5 years in the House of Representatives and 8 years as executive of Metro. He's currently the vice provost at Portland State University, as well as executive director of extended studies. Mike?
Gentlemen, thank you very much. I think one of the key components of conservation is education, and Tony just alluded to that. In fact, I think the very first conversation you and I ever had was around education, and I was impressed with your credentials in that area. And yet I'm often puzzled because the public sometimes has a difficult time with this. We were talking about this earlier. There seems to be a lot of attraction around large animals. I was always curious about why it is that larger animals seem to get more attention than smaller ones. Giant condors, big cats get more public view and concern than a pygmy rabbit does, for example. And yet all of these species are interdependent, and the loss of one creates a habitat issue for all the others. And I know you've got some strong educational programs going here at the zoo, and I'm wondering if you could just talk about some of those specific things that you're doing to try to get the public to understand what the outcome of successful conservation is.
Great. Thanks, Mike. And I would just like to say before I answer that question, I miss you, Mike. Mike was my boss for my first about 5 years here. Mike hired me and brought me to Oregon, and I will be forever grateful for that. This is a wonderful place to be, and I'm happy to be here, and I thank you for hiring me. And I don't know if I was the only candidate for the job, but regardless, thank you for bringing me here, Mike. And I'm going to ask Chris and Mike to maybe comment. Chris and Mike work with kind of the biggest of the big. They're both experts with elephants, and I'm not. So I may ask them to address your question about why do people like big things. But I would like to throw in something I've noticed. We grown-ups, adults, seem to be fascinated by those big animals. I have noticed with kids some surprising things that Kids are most fascinated by things they can get close to. And they would much rather see a frog or a turtle in an exhibit right in front of them than they would see an elephant 50 yards away. So somewhere along the line, we lose that interest. You know, I really wish kids had the money. I mean, my job is a fundraiser. And you know, when you go out and try to raise money for Oregon spotted frogs and pygmy rabbits, you're right, Mr. Burton, it is very hard because grown-ups don't care about those things, but kids do. And my job would be easy as a fundraiser if kids had the money, but they don't. So I may ask Mike and Chris to comment if any ideas why people do go for those big things.
Well, as far as elephants, right now I don't believe there's enough money available for elephant conservation, even though they're big and people like them and they're mostly aware of what the issues are. But I found it amazing that in 1983, when the condor population got down to 22 individuals, all of a sudden millions of dollars rolled in. And if there's only 22 elephants left, it's way too late for them. So, you know, my big dilemma has been, how do we get the word out that, you know, 22 won't work for most species? We really need to be doing stuff with animals now where there's thousands of individuals rather than waiting for it to get that low in numbers. And the other comment would be that when we started the regional piece in 1997, we did talk about the experience on staff, and one of the components of our program was to provide hands-on opportunities for our staff, volunteers, and interns, because we felt that was a way to better get the word out about some of these smaller animals that most people don't know about. And in fact, it's been incredibly successful. I mean, we have, you know, people that are considered the experts on butterflies here at this zoo, and we have experts on pygmy rabbits here at this zoo, and it's because they had an opportunity to actually be involved. And then it ripples down through the interns and the volunteers. So, and when you talk to them too, you really get the sense of the excitement about conservation that they didn't have prior to the hands-on experience.
Yeah, I think the reason why, for me, that most of these animals people identify with is the culture that I know I grew up with. When I went to my first zoo, the first thing we saw was the elephant. First movie I remember was Dumbo, about elephants. So I think growing up, the Wild Kingdom shows, he didn't really wrestle too many naked mole rats. I do remember them, you know, darting tigers and doing that sort of thing. So I know growing up as a kid, I identified more with the larger animals. Tony's correct. I have an 8 and 11-year-old, and they really like the naked mole rats a lot better than most animals in the zoo. And I think our culture is changing, where our children are being exposed more to different animals and different things with, like, Discovery Channel and Animal Planet and things like that. So I think that's why most of us recognize the mega charismatic vertebrates, which we like to term these things. But the education that we do with our folks is they are all interconnected and they're interdependent, and we have to make them understand that a naked mole rat is just as important as an elephant in our world.
And Mike, finally, about your question about education, as you know, we do a tremendous amount of education work at the zoo. There are thousands of summer campers here this summer, and we have overnights and lectures and zoo outreach programs. I think the most interesting evolution and the change that we've discovered, in the old days when we were evaluating our education programs, we looked at numbers. We wanted to see lots and lots and lots of kids, and that's how we've decided whether we were doing good or not. But oftentimes those kids were here for 45 minutes, and we were hoping we were changing their lives in 45 minutes. And I think the evolution of our programs now is we still offer those programs because we know kids love them, but we also invest heavily in kids, particularly in underserved youth and urban kids and younger kids, more time, programs that are more involved. In fact, my son is going to be a junior zoo teen here next week. It's a 2-week-long camp where he's going to be here every day for 4 hours for 2 weeks. So those kind of investments, quality time investments in kids, I think are going to make a difference in the next generation.
Member. My question is, how do you choose the projects you're going to do, like the butterflies or the frogs? I mean, is it by virtue of what's the most endangered, or is it sort of serendipitous where money is coming from, or anyway, how are those choices made?
Yes. We certainly pride ourselves on being flexible and opportunistic. I will tell you the way it usually works out is Mike comes to see me, usually alone, because the first meeting doesn't go well. when he tells me we have an opportunity, and I start ranting and raving about the budget, and I'm pulling my hair out. I had a full head of hair when Mike Burton hired me. But then with his staff, we evaluate the program, and it takes a while to make the decision. We do have to look at our resources. We look at the need, who the partners are, what our role would be, and just at this point in time, whether we can take on any more or not.
I'm Tamsin Wausau, City Club member. I know we're at the zoo and we're talking about animals, but I just have to raise that pesky people issue. And I noticed, as we talked about Zimbabwe with all the political and economic ramifications, but even as we talked about Oregon species, that a lot of the issues were agriculture and development or those kinds of things. And obviously, we have a need for people to live in these places and to make livings and do all of that at the same time to conserve. So how are you wrestling with, meeting both needs in order to conserve some of these species?
Thanks. That is a tough issue, and I will tell you that when I talked about the future, one of the reasons I talk about looking at conservation different and thinking about it in a different way is if we continue to assume that conservation is something that happens away from people, it's a losing battle. There are more and more people with a bigger and bigger footprint on the land, and unless we find a way to incorporate conservation into everything we do, our activities and our planning, our development, we're not going to have these things in the future because the population is growing. There aren't too many groups out there that are willing to tackle overpopulation head on as a problem. So I feel like we're fighting a losing battle sometimes because we don't do a good enough job of incorporating the development and the people part of it into conservation. So we need to get better at that, or we need to get bolder and talk about things like overpopulation, which most zoos and aquariums and even conservation organizations at this time aren't willing to fight that battle.
I think for me, working on an international level, you have to understand there has to be a balance between the people and animals when you come in to work a project like this. Animals can be an economic value to the people within that country as well. The education piece is very important, I think, on the researchers' part, because we need to learn about what's going on in that country that we're living in, the social and economic problems, but we can also help educate the folks at the same time. We've been fortunate enough to get enough funding to train a couple locals to be ecologists. They have education and they have the desire to learn, and we can take that opportunity to train them, and it just starts trickling down from there. They tell their friends, and the word gets out, and we brought the school children in. It's taking every opportunity you can to teach those people, but we, as the researchers, really need to understand the impact of what is happening and going on in those areas that people work, and I think sometimes that gets missed. We're not advocating no hunting. We understand that when a person can make 10,000 US dollars, which is over 5 million Zimbabwe dollars on one leopard hunt, that's huge. That feeds a lot of people, it employs a lot of people. So we don't advocate no hunting, we would advocate responsible hunting. As one instance, as part of our project. We want to get the information, they can make better choices for themselves.
In a conservation partnership, the land use issues sometimes don't lie solely with the zoo, and the zoo's major contribution is often bringing animals into captivity, caring for them, learning about their husbandry, reproducing them so that there are animals to bring back out into the range areas.
Monroe?
I don't know who should answer me, but I have a preliminary question. Is the wolverine listed in your Oregon system of animal life?
Do you mean, is wolverine a native species in Oregon, or is it listed as threatened and endangered?
Is it listed among the animals on your list, either of predators now here or where they were? Certainly were here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, whether they're still here or not, I think is debatable. I think people are looking for wolverines out there, and there's scant evidence that they're still here. It's not a species we work with. It's a species we intend to work with in the future. Our Great Northwest exhibit isn't finished yet. We have a couple more years till the Great Northwest project is all done. And when it is done, we intend to have a wolverine exhibit in there. Wolverines are a species that are part of Oregon's kind of biological history and culture, and we want to show people that animal.
In 30 years ago or more, I was up in the mountains quite a bit, and one time I saw.
No, we have to have a question.
Yeah, I have to predicate it on this incident. I was in the San Diego Pass, and clear down below me is a deep, I was at the very crest, and I saw this animal shambling around. I'd seen a lot of wolverines in Alaska, but never here. And I thought it was a wolverine. I got back and reported to the State Department. They said the last reported wolverine was in 1905 in Northeast Oregon.
Monroe, I'm sorry,
Yeah,
but respectfully, we don't have any more time for
The nub of
questions.
this is that a few years ago now, 3 wolverines were killed on the San Diego Pass. I thought maybe, and they would eliminate a lot of other species if they were preserved. How do we answer the danger of predators eliminating each other?
Well, I think carnivores are an important part of the community, and the idea that carnivores are bad for the other animals in the ecosystem has been pretty well refuted by scientific evidence. Carnivores are just key in conservation. They're an important part of the conservation community, the community of wildlife out there, and the danger of an animal going extinct naturally because the predators like a wolverine wipe them out is pretty unlikely.
Yeah, just time for one last short question, please.
I've always wondered about Forest Park, having animals more in there, because the park needs more maintenance and the animals need more room. In my mind, I'd love to see elephants pulling up the ivy. And also watering the trees, if you have it. But I think it would be fun. I mean, I think the people that are walking through the park would enjoy it. Is there any possibility of that kind of thing?
That we would be taking our elephants to Forest Park?
Is there a possibility of wiring or holding their feet? You know, I don't know.
I'll let you take that one.
I don't think in my lifetime we'll be taking elephants there, but as a matter of fact, there are regulations through the American Zoo and American Zoo and Aquarium Association that doesn't allow us to use our animals in that fashion.
You know, I'm gonna tell you, I'll make this a really quick story, but it's one that I find just absolutely fascinating. I mentioned before the idea of conservation on a landscape scale. The zoo is very interested in wilderness protection. Our zoos are getting more and more interested in wilderness protection, and there are a lot of people that are interested in reintroducing animals like wolves or grizzly bears in different parts of the country. And I think that's pretty well understood. Everybody knows there are people working on that. But there's actually a small fringe out there that looks at what the habitats looked like 10,000 years ago and 12,000 years ago, recognizing that one time we had woolly rhinos in this country. We had a couple different species of elephants in this country. And this small group of kind of wacky conservation biologists almost have advocated introducing elephants and rhinos back into the native North American system. I don't think we'll see that because it's such a small fringe group, but it sure does create some interesting ideas and visions of what the country might look like again if we reintroduce rhinos and elephants, doesn't it?
Well, it creates some interesting pictures in my mind of someone running along the Wildwood Trail and running into one of them, but be that as it may, thank you very much, and we will meet in 2 weeks at the Governor Hotel with the Surgeon General. Thank you so much for hosting us.